In the annals of criminal history, few tales rival the chilling saga of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. Once hailed as the epitome of a picture-perfect couple, their names now evoke fear and revulsion, synonymous with unspeakable horrors. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka etched their names in infamy through a reign of terror that stained the Canadian landscape with blood. Together, they orchestrated a macabre symphony of abduction, sexual assault, and murder, targeting the most vulnerable among us, innocent teenage girls. But what sets their crimes apart is the unfathomable depth of betrayal. Homolka, once perceived as the loyal partner, became an active participant in the depravity, even betraying her own flesh and blood, her sister, allowing her to become one of the victims. Their atrocities shook the very foundations of Canadian society, leaving scars that linger to this day. This is the story of the Ken and Barbie killers, a tale of twisted desire, manipulation, and the darkest depths of human depravity. Our episodes deal with serious and often distressing incidents. If at any time you feel like you need support, please contact your local crisis centre. This episode discusses murder and sexual assault, including graphic details of rape. This episode therefore may be graphic and upsetting to some. It may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Karla Leanne Homolka, also known as Karla Leanne Teal and Leanne Bordelais, was born on the 4th of May 1970 in Port Credit, Ontario, Canada. Karla was the eldest of Karel and Dorothy Homolka's 3 daughters. Her sisters were Laurie, born in 1971, and Tammy, born in 1975. The family lived in St. Catharines, Ontario. Karla began working part-time at a pet shop while attending Sir Winston Churchill Secondary School. After graduation in 1988, she was hired by Thorold Veterinary Clinic to work as a veterinary assistant. She later took a similar job at the Martindale Animal Clinic, from which she stole drugs that were to be used in her future crimes. Paul Kenneth Bernardo was born into a wealthy but dysfunctional family. His mother Marilyn, who had been adopted by well-to-do Toronto lawyer Gerald Eastman, and his wife Elizabeth, was raised in a stable household. His father Kenneth was the son of an English woman and an Italian immigrant who created a highly successful marble and tile business, but was abusive to his wife and children. Instead of entering the family business, Kenneth Bernardo became an accountant. After her father had disapproved of an earlier boyfriend, Eastman married Bernardo in 1960. Like his father, Kenneth Bernardo was said to be abusive. Marilyn, after having given birth to a son and a daughter, began seeing a former boyfriend. She became pregnant and gave birth to Paul Kenneth Bernardo on the 27th of August 1964. Kenneth Bernardo tolerated his wife's affair and is listed as the biological father on Paul's birth certificate. In 1975, Kenneth Bernardo fondled a girl and was charged with child molestation. He also sexually abused his own daughter. Paul's mother became depressed over her husband's abuse, withdrew from family life, and lived in the basement of their Scarborough home. Though the elder child felt the effects of the emotional and mental turmoil, young Paul appeared to be unscathed by it. Following an argument between his parents when Paul was 16, his mother told him of his actual parentage. Repulsed, he began to openly call his mother a slob and whore. Paul graduated from Sir Wilfrid Laurier Collegiate Institute, opting to work for Amway, whose sales culture had a deep effect on him. Paul and his friends practiced their sales techniques on young women they met in bars, and were fairly successful. By the time Paul attended the University of Toronto Scarborough, he had developed dark sexual fantasies, enjoyed humiliating women in public, and beat up the women he dated. Karla met Paul at a Scarborough restaurant on the 17th of October 1987, while they were both attending a convention in Toronto. She was 17 years old. He was 23. Bernardo proposed to Homolka on the 24th of December that year. The age of majority in Ontario is 18, and at the time, the age of consent in Canada was 14. They became sexually interested in each other almost immediately. Unlike the other girls he knew, she encouraged his sadistic sexual behaviour, also encouraging his acts as the Scarborough rapist. Paul Bernardo was good-looking and charming, an unfortunate combination that he used to manipulate women and take them off their guard. Before long, he would give in to a far darker impulse. Starting in May of 1987, the suburb of Scarborough in Ontario was plagued by a series of horrific crimes. In the early hours of the morning of the 4th of May 1987, a young woman getting off the bus was grabbed and brutally raped near her parents' home. Over the next week alone, there would be 2 more similar assaults. Bernardo committed his second rape on the 14th of May. He attacked a 19-year-old woman in the backyard of her parents' house. This incident lasted over an hour. Bernardo attempted his third rape on the 27th of July. Although he beat the young woman, he abandoned the attack after she fought back. Bernardo committed his third rape on the 16th of December against a 15-year-old girl. This rape lasted about 1 hour. The following day, the Toronto Police Service issued a warning to women in Scarborough travelling alone at night, especially those taking buses. On the 23rd of December, Bernardo committed his fourth rape. During this attack, Bernardo raped the 17-year-old with a knife he used to threaten his victims. It was at this point he began to be referred to as the Scarborough Rapist. On the 18th of April 1988, Bernardo attacked another 17-year-old. The fifth assault. This one lasted 45 minutes. On the 25th of May 1988, Bernardo was nearly caught by a uniformed Metro Toronto investigator staking out a bus shelter. The investigator noticed him hiding under a tree and pursued him on foot, but Bernardo escaped. 5 days later, on the 30th of May, Bernardo committed his sixth rape, this time in Clarkson, about 25 miles southwest of Scarborough. This attack against an 18-year-old lasted 30 minutes. Bernardo attempted a seventh Scarborough rape on the 4th of October 1988. His intended victim fought him off, but he inflicted 2 stab wounds to her thigh and buttock, which required 12 stitches. On the 16th of November, Bernardo committed his seventh rape against an 18-year-old in the backyard of her parents' house. The next day, the Metro Police formed a special task force dedicated to capturing the Scarborough Rapist. On the 27th of December, an alerted neighbour chased Bernardo off after he had begun his attempted 8th rape. Bernardo attempted to rape another young woman on the 20th of June 1989. She fought against him and her screams alerted neighbours. Bernardo fled with scratches on his face. On the 15th of August 1989, Bernardo committed his 8th rape against a 22-year-old woman. He had stalked her the previous night from outside the window of her apartment and waited for her to arrive home. This particularly vicious attack lasted 2 hours. Bernardo committed his 9th rape on the 21st of November against a 15-year-old whom he saw in a bus shelter. This attack lasted 45 minutes. On the 22nd of December, Bernardo committed his 10th rape against the 19-year-old. This attack occurred in a stairwell of an underground parking lot and lasted 30 minutes. Bernardo committed his 11th rape on the 26th of May 1990. This rape lasted over an hour. However, his 19-year-old victim's vivid recollection of her attacker permitted police to make a computer composite photograph, which was released 2 days later by police and published in Toronto and nearby area newspapers. In July 1990, 2 months after receiving tips that Bernardo fit the Scarborough rapist composite, he was interviewed by 2 police detectives. The female victims were all between the ages of 15 and 21, and the attacks all included beatings, intense verbal abuse, and dire threats to discourage victims from going to the police. This led authorities to conclude that they had all been perpetrated by the same man, whom the newspapers quickly dubbed the Scarborough Rapist. During his nearly 5-year rampage as the Scarborough Rapist, Paul Bernardo raped or attempted to rape at least 19 young women that are known to police. The victims were all young women, often grabbed around bus stops, although at least one 15-year-old was attacked in her own bedroom. A couple of Bernardo's victims managed to fight him off, and Bernardo was questioned by the police twice, but he was never named as an official suspect. It wasn't until May of 1990 that one of Bernardo's victims was able to give police an accurate description of her attacker, and by then, the Scarborough Rapist had become even more unhinged. Between May and September 1990, the police had submitted more than 130 suspect samples for DNA testing when they received 2 reports that the person they were seeking was Paul Bernardo. The first in June had been called in by a bank employee. The second call was received from Tina Smyrnis, the wife of one of the 3 Smyrnis brothers who were among Bernardo's closest friends. Smyrnis told the detectives that Bernardo had been called in on a previous rape investigation, once in December 1987, but he had never been interviewed. He frequently talked about his sex life to Smyrnis and stated that he liked analingus, rough sex, and anal sex. Alex Smyrnis's phrasing was awkward and stilted, and consequently left the detectives unsure of whether to take him seriously. After cross-checking several files, the detectives decided to interview Bernardo. The interview, on the 20th of November 1990, lasted 35 minutes, and Bernardo voluntarily gave samples for forensic testing. When the detectives asked Bernardo why he thought he was being investigated for the rapes, he admitted that he did resemble the composite. The detectives quickly concluded that such a well-educated, well-adjusted, congenial young man couldn't be responsible for the vicious crimes, and appeared far more credible than Alex Smyrnis, who, with his awkward, strange way of speaking, police believed might just be trying to collect the reward. Paul Bernardo was released the following day. Following the interview, Bernardo drove to St. Catherine's and held a secret meeting with Homolka, assuring her that he was not the Scarborough rapist. Bernardo moved permanently to St Catherine's on the 1st of February 1991. The sexual assaults in Scarborough had stopped. However, on the 6th of April 1991, Bernardo committed his 12th rape, this one in St Catherine's. Again, the victim was young, aged 14. Unlike the other attacks, this one occurred early in the morning and was not near a bus stop. By 1990, Bernardo was spending large amounts of time with the Homolka family, who liked him. He was engaged to the eldest daughter, but flirted constantly with the youngest one, Tammy. He had not told them he had lost his job as an accountant, and instead was smuggling cigarettes across the nearby US-Canadian border. He had become obsessed with Tammy, peeping into her window and entering her room to masturbate while she slept. Karla helped him by breaking the blinds in her sister's room to allow Bernardo access. In July, Bernardo took Tammy across the border to get beer for a party. While there, Bernardo later told his fiancée they got drunk and began making out. 6 months before their 1991 wedding, Karla Homolka stole the anaesthetic agent halothane and Valium from the clinic she worked at. On the 23rd of December 1990, Homolka and Bernardo administered sleeping pills to the 15-year-old Tammy in a rum and eggnog cocktail. After Tammy was unconscious, Homolka and Bernardo undressed her and Karla applied a halothane-soaked cloth to her sister's nose and mouth. Karla Homolka wanted to give Tammy's virginity to Bernardo for Christmas, as, according to Homolka, Bernardo was disappointed by not having been Karla's first sex partner. With Tammy's parents sleeping upstairs, the pair filmed themselves as they raped her in the basement. Tammy began to vomit and choke. The pair tried to revive her, then called 911, but not before they hid evidence, dressed Tammy, and moved her into her basement bedroom. A few hours later, Tammy Homolka was pronounced dead at St Catherine's General Hospital without having regained consciousness. Despite the pair's behaviour, including vacuuming and washing laundry in the middle of the night, and despite the presence of a chemical burn on Tammy's face, Niagara Regional Coroner and the Homolka family accepted the pair's version of events. The official cause of Tammy Homolka's death was ruled accidental, choking on her vomit after consumption of alcohol. The pair subsequently filmed themselves with Karla wearing Tammy's clothing and pretending to be her. They also moved out of the Homolka house to a rented Port Dalhousie bungalow to let her parents cope with their grief. When she still worked at a pet shop 2 years earlier, Homolka had befriended a then 15-year-old girl. On the 7th of June 1991, Homolka invited the teen, referred to as Jane Doe in the ensuing trials, for a girls' night out. After an evening of shopping and dining, Homolka took Jane Doe to 57 Bayview Avenue and began to ply her with alcohol laced with halcyon. After Jane Doe lost consciousness, Homolka called Bernardo to tell him his surprise wedding gift was ready. They undressed the girl, who was a virgin, and Bernardo videotaped Homolka as she raped the girl, before Bernardo vaginally and anally penetrated her. The next morning, the teenager was nauseous. She believed her vomiting was due to having drunk alcohol for the first time. She did not realise she had been violated. She was invited back to Port Dalhousie in August, this time to spend the night. Jane Doe, whose identity remains protected by law, stopped breathing after she was drugged and Bernardo had begun to rape her. Homolka called 911 for help. but called back a few minutes later to cancel the ambulance after they were able to resuscitate her. The emergency crew was recalled without follow-up. Jane Doe visited the couple once more on the 22nd of December 1992. This time, Homolka pressured her to have sex with Bernardo. She became upset and left. Early in the morning on the 15th of June 1991, Bernardo took a detour through Burlington, halfway between Toronto and St. Catharines, to steal license plates. There, he found Leslie Mahaffey. The 14-year-old had missed her curfew after attending a funeral and was locked out of her house and had been unable to find anyone with whom she could stay overnight. It was then that Bernardo left his car and eyed up his next victim. Bernardo approached her and told her that he was looking to break into a neighbour's house. Unfazed, she asked if he had any cigarettes. As Bernardo led her to his car, he blindfolded her, forced her into the vehicle, and drove her to Port Dalhousie, where he informed Homolka that they had a new playmate. Bernardo and Homolka subsequently videotaped themselves torturing and sexually abusing Mahaffey, all while listening to Bob Marley and David Bowie. At one point, Bernardo said, "You're doing a good job, Leslie. A damned good job." Then he added, "The next 2 hours are going to determine what I do to you. Right now, you're scoring perfect." On another segment of tape played at Bernardo's trial, the assault escalated. Mahaffey cried out in pain and begged Bernardo to stop. In the prosecution's description of the scene, he was sodomizing her while her hands were bound with twine. Later, Mahaffey told Bernardo that her blindfold seemed to be slipping, an ominous development as it signalled the possibility that she might be able to identify both her tormentors if permitted to live. The following day, Bernardo claimed that Homolka fed her a lethal dose of halcyon. Bernardo had stated that he had always intended to free the girls he and Homolka had kidnapped. However, when Mahaffey's blindfold fell off, Homolka was concerned that Mahaffey would identify Bernardo and report the couple to the police. Bernardo claimed that Homolka planned to murder Mahaffey by injecting an air bubble into her bloodstream, triggering an air embolism. Homolka claimed that instead, Bernardo strangled her. The pair put her body in their basement to be disposed of later. The following day, the Homolka family had dinner at the house. After the Homolkas and their remaining daughter Laurie had left, Bernardo and Homolka decided the best way to dispose of the evidence would be to dismember Leslie Mahaffey and encase each piece in cement. Bernardo bought a dozen bags of cement at a hardware store the following day. He kept the receipts, which would prove damaging at his trial. Bernardo used his grandfather's circular saw to cut the body. Bernardo and Homolka then made numerous trips to dump the cement blocks in Lake Gibson, 18 kilometres south of Port Dalhousie. At least one of the blocks weighed 90 kilograms and proved beyond the pair's patience or abilities to sink. It rested near the shore, where a father and son on a fishing expedition discovered it on the 29th of June 1991. Leslie Mahaffey's orthodontic appliance proved instrumental in identifying her. Bernardo and Homolka's third murder victim was Kristen French. On the afternoon of the 16th of April 1992, Bernardo and Homolka were driving through St. Catharines to look for potential victims. It was after school hours on the day before Good Friday. Students were still going home, but by and large the streets were empty. As they passed Holy Cross Secondary School, the main Catholic high school in the city's north end, they spotted Kristen French, a 15-year-old student, walking briskly to her nearby home. The couple pulled into the parking lot of nearby Grace Lutheran Church, and Homolka got out of the car, map in hand, pretending to need assistance. As French looked at the map, Bernardo attacked from behind, brandishing a knife and forcing her into the front seat of their car. From her back seat, Homolka controlled the girl by pulling down her hair. French took the same route home every day, taking about 15 minutes to get home in order to attend to her dog's needs. Soon after she should have arrived, her parents became convinced that she had met with foul play and notified police. Within 24 hours, Niagara Regional Police, the NRP, had assembled a team and searched the area along her route and found several witnesses who had seen the abduction from different locations, thus giving police a fairly clear picture. In addition, one of Kristen's shoes recovered from the parking lot underscored the seriousness of the abduction. Over the 3 days of Easter weekend, Bernardo and Homolka videotaped themselves as they tortured, raped, and sodomized Kristen French, forcing her to drink large amounts of alcohol and to behave submissively to Bernardo. At Bernardo's trial, Crown Prosecutor Ray Houlihan said that Bernardo always intended to kill her because she was never blindfolded and was capable of identifying her captors. While Bernardo was out buying pizza on the 18th of April, he was spotted by Kelly Patrick, whom he had stalked the previous month. Her report to the police was mishandled, as noted by Judge Archie Campbell in the 1995 inquiry into the police investigation of Bernardo's crimes, thus negating any chance of Kristen French being discovered at the Bernardo house. The following day, the couple murdered French before going to the Homolkas for Easter dinner. Homolka testified at her trial that Bernardo had strangled French for exactly 7 minutes while she watched. Bernardo said Homolka beat her with a rubber mallet because she had tried to escape, and that French ended up being strangled on a noose tied around her neck, secured to a hope chest. Immediately thereafter, Homolka went to fix her hair. French's nude body was found in a ditch on the 30th of April 1992 in Burlington, approximately 45 minutes from St. Catherine's and a short distance from the cemetery where Leslie Mahaffey is buried. She had been washed and her hair had been cut off. It was originally thought that the hair was removed as a trophy, but Homolka testified that the hair had been cut off to impede identification. In addition to the confirmed murders of Tammy Lynn Homolka, Leslie Erin Mahaffey, and Kristen Dawn French, suspicions remain about other possible victims or intended victims of Bernardo and Homolka. Shortly after Tammy Homolka's funeral, her parents went out of town and Laurie visited her grandparents in Mississauga, leaving the house empty. On the weekend of the 12th of January 1991, according to author Stephen Williams, Bernardo abducted a girl, took her to the house and raped her while Homolka watched. Afterwards, he dropped her off on a deserted road near Lake Gibson. Bernardo and Homolka referred to her simply as January Girl. At about 5:30 a.m. on the 6th of April 1991, Bernardo abducted a 14-year-old who was warming up for her duties as a coxswain on one of the local rowing teams. The girl was distracted by a blonde woman who waved at her from her car, enabling Bernardo to drag her into the shrubbery near the rowing club. There, he sexually assaulted her, forced her to remove all her clothes and wait 5 minutes, during which he disappeared. On the 28th of July, 1991, Bernardo stalked Sydney Kirshen, aged 21, after he saw her while driving home from work. On the 9th of August, he resumed stalking her. This time, she took evasive action, stopping at her boyfriend's house just prior to his arrival. After spotting Bernardo, the boyfriend gave chase, came across Bernardo's gold Nissan, and took note of the license plate. The couple reported the incident to the Niagara Regional Police, who established that the car belonged to Paul Kenneth Bernardo. An NRP officer visited the Bernardo's house where the car was parked in the driveway, but did not pursue the matter, nor did he submit an official police report. On the 30th of November 1991, 14-year-old Terry Anderson vanished about 3 blocks from the parking lot where Kristen French would be abducted and never returned. Terry was a grade 9 student at Lakeport Secondary School, next door to Kristen French's school. Terry Anderson and Kristen French disappeared within 2 kilometers of each other. In April 1992, NRP said they had no evidence to suggest a link. But in May 1992, Terry Anderson's body was found in the water at Port Dalhousie. The medical examiner saw no evidence of foul play, despite the difficulties of determining such factors in a body that had been in the water for 6 months. The coroner's ruling that her death was by drowning, probably as a result of drinking beer and taking LSD, was controversial in light of Leslie Mahaffey's and Kristen French's murders. A newspaper clipping found during the police search of the Bernardo house described a rape that occurred in Hawaii during the couple's honeymoon there. The presence of the article, the rape's similarity to Bernardo's modus operandi, and its occurrence during the Bernardo's presence led police to speculate on Bernardo's involvement. Law enforcement officials on both sides of the border have stated their belief that Bernardo was responsible for this rape, but due to extradition issues, this case was never prosecuted. In 1997, Derek Finkel's book, No Claim to Mercy, was published, which presented evidence tying Bernardo to the murder of Elizabeth Bain, who disappeared on the 19th of June 1990, only 3 weeks after the last known attack of the Scarborough rapist. Bain told her mother she was going to check the tennis schedule on the Scarborough campus of the University of Toronto. 3 days later, her car was found with a large bloodstain in the back seat. Robert Baltovich, who has consistently maintained his innocence, was convicted on the 31st of March 1992 of second-degree murder in the death of his girlfriend. At trial, his lawyers suggested that the then unidentified Scarborough rapist was responsible for the crime. He served 8 years of a life term before being released pending his appeal. In September 2004, his appeal was processed. His lawyers alleged that he had been wrongfully convicted and that Bernardo was guilty of the murder. On the 2nd of December 2004, the Ontario Court of Appeal set aside the conviction. On the 15th of July 2005, Ontario's Ministry of the Attorney General announced that Robert Baltovich would face a new trial. On the 22nd of April 2008, and after a series of pre-trial motions, including the presentation of evidence implicating Bernardo in the murder of Elizabeth Bain, Crown Attorney Philip Kotonen advised the court that he would be calling no evidence and asked the jury to find Baltovich not guilty of second-degree murder. On the 29th of March 1992, Bernardo stalked and videotaped Shanna and Kerry Patrick from his car and followed them to their parents' house. The Patrick sisters incorrectly recorded his license plate number. Shanna Patrick reported the incident to the NRP on the 31st of March and was given an incident number should further information develop. With Kristen French under Homolka's guard on the 18th of April 1992, Bernardo went out to buy dinner and rent a movie. He was spotted by Kerry Patrick, who attempted to track him to his house. Despite losing him, she got a better description of his license plate and car, which she reported to the NRP. This information, however, was mishandled by police and slipped into the black hole to which Judge Archie Campbell would refer to in the Campbell Report of 1996, an inquiry into police mishandling of evidence in the case. Had this information been handled correctly, it is possible that police may have found Kristen French alive at his house. Homolka and Bernardo had been questioned by police several times in connection with the Scarborough rapist investigation, Tammy Homolka's death, Bernardo's stalking of Sydney Kirshen, and the Patrick sisters before the death of Kristen French. The officer filed a report, and on the 12th of May 1992, an NRP sergeant and constable interviewed Bernardo briefly. The officers decided that he was an unlikely suspect, although Bernardo admitted having been questioned in connection with the Scarborough rapes. 3 days later, the Green Ribbon Task Force was created to investigate the murders of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. Meanwhile, the couple applied to have their surnames changed legally from Bernardo and Homolka to Teal, which Bernardo had taken from the villain, a serial killer of the 1988 movie Criminal Law. The couple's name change was approved on the 13th of February 1993. At the end of May, John Motal, an acquaintance of Bernardo, also reported Bernardo as a possible murder suspect. On the 27th of December 1992, Bernardo severely beat Homolka with a flashlight on the limbs, head and face. Claiming that she had been in an automobile accident, the severely bruised Homolka returned to work on the 4th of January 1993. Her skeptical co-workers called Homolka's parents, who assumed they were rescuing her the following day by physically removing her from the house. Homolka went back in, frantically searching for something. Her parents took her to St. Catherine's General Hospital, where her injuries were documented, and she gave a statement to the NRP claiming she had been a battered spouse and filed charges against Bernardo. He was arrested but later released on his own recognizance. Homolka moved in with relatives in Brampton. In December 1992, the Centre of Forensic Science finally began testing DNA samples provided by Bernardo 3 years earlier. 26 months after the sample had been submitted, Toronto police were informed that Bernardo's DNA matched that of the Scarborough rapist and immediately placed him under 24-hour surveillance. Metro Toronto Sexual Assault Squad investigators interviewed Homolka on the 9th of February 1993. Despite telling her their suspicions about Bernardo, Homolka concentrated on his abuse of her. Later that night, she told her aunt and uncle that her husband was the Scarborough rapist, that they were involved in the rapes and murders of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, and that the rapes were recorded on videotape. The NRP, meanwhile, reopened the investigation into Tammy Homolka's death. On the 11th of February 1993, Homolka met with Niagara Falls lawyer George Walker, who sought full immunity from St. Catherine's Crown Attorney Ray Houlihan in exchange for her cooperation. Homolka was also placed under 24-hour surveillance. The next day, George Walker met with Murray Seagal, director of the Crown Criminal Law Office. Walker told Segal of videotapes of the rapes, and Segal advised Walker that considering Homolka's involvement in the crimes, full immunity was not a possibility. Metro Sexual Assault Squad and the Green Ribbon Task Force detectives arrested Bernardo on numerous charges on the 17th of February 1993 and obtained search warrants. Because Bernardo's link to the murders was weak, the warrants contained certain limitations. No evidence that was not expected and documented in the warrant was permitted to be removed from the premises. All videotapes the police found had to be viewed in the house. Damage to the house had to be kept to a minimum, and police could not tear down walls looking for the videotapes. On the 21st of February 1993, police found a tape in which a short segment depicted Bernardo, Homolka, and an unnamed American prostitute having oral sex with an unconscious, unidentified young woman, believed at first to have been Kristen French. The unidentified girl would later be called Jane Doe after the discovery of the full tapes, in which she was revealed to be a minor. Her identity remains covered by the publication ban. The search warrants were only issued on a temporary basis and expired on the 30th of April 1993. On the 6th of May 1993, Bernardo instructed his lawyer, Ken Murray, in writing, to enter the house and remove, but not to watch, 6 8mm videotapes hidden behind a pot light in the bathroom. Homolka led police through the house on the 17th of May, leading them to find pertinent DNA evidence, as well as a receipt for the excess cement which tied Bernardo to Leslie Mahaffey's murder. The authorities soon concluded that they had no prima facie case against the couple. Discussions with Homolka's lawyer therefore proceeded on the assumption that Homolka could provide the information they required, for a price. Moreover, George Walker pressed the case for Homolka's having been abused, though Segal countered that no amount of abuse could account for her participation in the murders. The justification came largely from an FBI document titled Compliant Victims of the Sexual Sadist, written by profiler Roy Hazelwood. On the 5th of May 1993, Walker was informed that the government was offering Homolka a 12-year sentence plea bargain that she had 1 week to accept. If she declined, the government would charge her with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, and other crimes. Walker accepted the offer, and Homolka later agreed to it. On the 14th of May 1993, the plea agreement between Homolka and the Crown was finalised, and she began giving her statements to police investigators. Citing the need to protect Bernardo's right to a fair trial, a publication ban was imposed on Homolka's preliminary inquiry. The Crown had applied for the ban imposed on the 5th of July 1993 by Mr. Justice Francis Kovacs of the Ontario Court General Division. Homolka, through her lawyers, supported the ban, whereas Bernardo's lawyers argued that he would be prejudiced by the ban since Homolka previously had been portrayed as his victim. 4 media outlets and 1 author also opposed the application. Some lawyers argued that rumours could be doing more damage to the future trial process than the publication of the actual evidence. Public access to the internet effectively nullified the court's order. However, as did proximity to the American border, since a publication ban by an Ontario court cannot apply in New York, Michigan, or anywhere outside of Ontario. American journalists cited the First Amendment in editorials and published details of Homolka's testimony, which were widely distributed by many internet sources. Information and rumours spread across a myriad of electronic networks available to anyone with a computer and a modem in Canada. Many of the internet rumours went beyond the known details of the case. Newsweek's 6th of December 1993 edition, for example, reprinted without permission, as the correspondent reported. Another account said that to keep them from escaping, both girls were hobbled by their abductors, who used veterinary surgical instruments to sever tendons in their legs. This information was not verified to be true. Newspapers in Buffalo, Detroit, Washington, New York, and even Britain, together with border radio and television stations, reported details gleaned from sources at Homolka's trial. The syndicated series A Current Affair aired 2 programs on the crimes. Canadians bootlegged copies of the Buffalo Evening News across the border, prompting orders to the NRP to arrest all those with more than one copy at the border. Extra copies were confiscated. Copies of other newspapers, including the New York Times, were either turned back at the border or were not accepted by distributors in Ontario. Gordon Dom, a retired police officer who defied the publication ban by distributing details from the foreign media, was charged and convicted on 2 counts of contempt of court. At the time of the Homolka trial, 3 features of the case worried and concerned the public. Little was known about the respective roles Homolka and Bernardo played in their actions and the killing of their victims. By spring 1993, it was clear that the Crown's case against Bernardo depended on Homolka's evidence. In simple terms, to secure a conviction against him, her story had to be believed. Yet on no view of the facts, then known, could she be absolved. By casting her as a victim of his predatory behaviour, her responsibility for the crimes that were committed could be diminished and her credibility as a witness preserved. On the 18th of May 1993, Homolka was arraigned on 2 counts of manslaughter. Bernardo was charged with 2 counts each of kidnapping, unlawful confinement, aggravated sexual assault, and first-degree murder, as well as 1 of dismemberment. Coincidentally, that day, Bernardo's lawyers first watched the tapes. Murray decided to hold on to the tapes and use them to impeach Homolka on the stand during Bernardo's trial. Neither Murray nor Carolyn MacDonald, the other attorney on the defence team, were deeply experienced criminal lawyers, and it was only over time that their ethical dilemma showed itself also to be a potential criminal matter, for they were withholding evidence. By October 1993, he and his law partners had studied over 4,000 documents from the Crown. Murray has said he was willing to hand over the tapes to the Crown if they had let him cross-examine Homolka in the anticipated preliminary hearing. The hearing was never held. Homolka was tried on the 28th of June 1993. Though the publication ban the court had imposed limited the details released to the public, who were barred from the proceedings. Murray said the videotape showed Homolka sexually assaulting 4 female victims, having sex with a female prostitute in Atlantic City, and at another point, drugging an unconscious victim. During the summer of 1994, Murray had become concerned about serious ethical problems that had arisen in connection with the tapes and his continued representation of Bernardo. He consulted his own lawyer, Austin Cooper, who asked the Law Society of Upper Canada's Professional Conduct Committee for advice. The Law Society directed Murray in writing to seal the tapes in a package and turn them over to the judge presiding at Bernardo's trial. The Law Society further directed him to remove himself as Bernardo's counsel and to tell Bernardo what he had been instructed to do. On the 12th of September 1994, Austin Cooper attended Bernardo's trial and advised Justice Patrick Lesage of the Ontario Courts General Division, lawyer John Rowson, who replaced Murray as Bernardo's defence counsel, and the prosecutors about what the Law Society had directed Murray to do. Rowson argued that the tapes should have been turned over to the defence first. Murray handed the tapes along with a detailed summary to Rowson, who kept the tapes for about 2 weeks and then decided to turn them over to the prosecution. The revelation that a key piece of evidence had been kept from police for so long created a furor, especially when the public realised that Homolka had been Bernardo's willing accomplice. The tapes were not allowed to be shown to the spectators. Only the audio portion was available to them. Bernardo has always claimed that whilst he raped and tortured Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, it was Homolka who actually killed them. After the videotapes had been found, rumours spread that Homolka was an active participant of the crimes. The public grew incensed as the full extent of Homolka's role in the case was finally exposed, and the plea agreement now seemed unnecessary. However, as was provided in the plea bargain, Homolka had already disclosed sufficient information to the police, and the Crown found no grounds to break the agreement and reopen the case. Homolka's plea bargain had been offered before the contents of the videotapes were available for review. In return for the plea bargain of 12 years in prison for manslaughter, Homolka testified against Bernardo in his murder trial. This plea bargain received much public criticism from Canadians, as Homolka's first defence lawyer, Ken Murray, had withheld the videotapes that Bernardo made for 17 months. This was considered crucial evidence, and prosecutors said that they would never have agreed to the plea bargain if they had seen the tapes. Murray was later charged with obstruction of justice, which he was acquitted. He also faced a disciplinary hearing from the Law Society. There was a widespread belief that Homolka had known where the videotapes were hidden, that she willfully concealed the Jane Doe incidents, and most centrally, that her claims of being under Bernardo's control, a central tenet of the plea bargain, were dubious. Speculation was fed by a publicity ban on the plea bargain, which stood until Bernardo's trial. Although the contents of the videotapes would likely have led to a conviction of murder for Homolka, an inquiry into the conduct of the prosecutors who had made the plea bargain found their behaviour professional and responsible, and the resolution agreement that they had established with Homolka unassailable under the Criminal Code of Canada. Judge Patrick T. Galligan, reporting to the Attorney General on the matter, indicated that in his opinion, the Crown had no alternative but to negotiate with the accomplice in this case, as the lesser of two evils to deal with an accomplice, rather than to be left in a situation where a violent and dangerous offender cannot be prosecuted. In December 2001, Canadian authorities determined that there was no possible future use of the videotapes. The 6 videotapes depicting the torture and rape of Bernardo's and Homolka's victims were destroyed. The disposition of the tapes of Homolka watching and commenting on the tapes remains sealed. Bernardo's trial for the murders of French and Mahaffey took place in 1995 and included detailed testimony from Homolka and videotapes of the rapes. The venue was moved to Toronto from St. Catharines, where the murders occurred. During the trial, Bernardo claimed the deaths were accidental and later claimed that his wife was the actual killer. On the 1st of September 1995, Bernardo was convicted of a number of offences, including the 2 first-degree murders and 2 aggravated sexual assaults, and sentenced to life imprisonment with possibility of parole after 25 years. Bernardo was also declared a dangerous offender, making it unlikely that he will ever be released. During her interrogation in 1993, Homolka told police that Bernardo once bragged to her that he had raped as many as 30 women, double the 15 assaults police suspected he had committed. She described him as the happy rapist. Bernardo had been kept in the segregation unit at the penitentiary for his own safety. Nonetheless, he had been attacked and harassed. Once, he was punched in the face by another inmate while returning from a shower in 1996. In June 1999, 5 convicts tried to storm the segregation range where Bernardo lived, and a riot squad had to use gas to disperse them. After her 1995 testimony against Bernardo, when Homolka returned to Kingston's prison for women, her mother started to suffer annual breakdowns between Thanksgiving and Christmas. The collapses were severe enough that she was hospitalised, sometimes for months at a time. Homolka was moved from Kingston in the summer of 1997 to Joliet Institution, a medium security prison in Joliet, Quebec, 80 kilometres northeast of Montreal, a facility called Club Fed by its critics. Homolka appeared to thrive in a highly structured prison environment. Several psychologists and psychiatrists examined her and agreed that she showed symptoms of spousal abuse, although some believe she simulated with coaching and books. In 1999, Toronto Star reporter Michelle Shepard came into possession of copies of her application to transfer to the Mason Therese Casgrain halfway house run by the Elizabeth Fry Society, and published the story noting the halfway house's proximity to local schools, hours before the Canadian courts issued a publication ban on the information. Homolka sued the government after her transfer to a Montreal halfway house was denied. Before her imprisonment, Homolka had been evaluated by numerous psychiatrists, psychologists, and other mental health and court officials. One reported that Homolka remained something of a diagnostic mystery. They said that despite her ability to present herself very well, there is a moral vacuity in her which is difficult, if not impossible, to explain. As Homolka proceeded through the Canadian prison system, there were frequent flashes that illuminated this perception. In Joliet, Homolka had a sexual affair with Linda Verrenou, who was serving time for a series of armed robberies and who reoffended so that she could be sent back to Joliet to be with Homolka. While being evaluated in 2000, Homolka told psychiatrist Robin Menzies that she did not consider the relationship to be homosexual, as Verrenou saw herself as a man and planned to undergo a sex operation in due course, the psychiatrist wrote. Psychiatrist Louis Morissette, meanwhile, noted in his report that Homolka was ashamed of the relationship and hid it from her parents and the experts who examined her. The psychiatrist mentions in his report that under the circumstances, the relationship was not abnormal. In a letter of apology to her family, she continued to blame Bernardo for all her misdeeds. He wanted me to get sleeping pills from work, threatened me, and physically and emotionally abused me when I refused. I tried so hard to save her, she said. Tim Danson, attorney for the victims' families, has said that she has never apologised to them. Homolka took correspondence courses in sociology through nearby Queen's University, which initially caused a media storm. Homolka was required to pay all fees, as well as her personal needs, from her fortnightly income of about $69, although she told author Stephen Williams in a subsequent letter that she got some financial assistance. Homolka later graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology. News of Homolka's self-improvement courses was greeted in the media with disdain. Nothing has changed. Concepts of remorse, repentance, shame, responsibility, and atonement have no place in the universe of Karla. Perhaps she simply lacks the moral gene, wrote another Globe columnist, Margaret Went. The complexities and challenges of completing behavioural studies of women who are suspected of having psychopathic traits have been noted in the forensic literature. The various different masks that the female psychopathic killer displays at different times often have more to do with the audience and the manipulation at that moment that will benefit the individual than the true nature of the individual wearing the mask. Dr. Graham Glancy, a forensic psychiatrist hired by Bernardo's chief defence lawyer, John Rosin, had offered an alternative theory to explain Homolka's behaviour. She appears to be a classic example of hybristophilia, an individual who is sexually aroused by a partner's violent sexual behaviour, Dr. Glancy suggested. In letters sent by Homolka whilst in prison, she disparaged a number of the professionals who had examined her and said she did not care what conditions she would receive upon release. She would spend 3 hours a day standing on her head should that be required. Upon her release, Homolka vigorously fought a string of conditions imposed upon her by a court. Homolka participated in every treatment program recommended by prison authorities, until she was asked to participate in a program that had been designed for male sex offenders. She refused on the grounds that she was neither a male nor a convicted sex offender. Where other inmates might apply for parole at the first opportunity, Homolka refrained from doing so. Because she was deemed a risk to re-offend, she was denied statutory release 2/3 of the way through her sentence. In 2004, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation noted that the National Parole Board had ruled that Karla Homolka must stay in prison for her full sentence, warning that she remains a risk to commit another violent crime. While the National Parole Board noted that she had made some progress towards rehabilitation, it expressed concern that Homolka had begun corresponding with a convicted murderer whom she had met when they were both being held in different parts of a prison handling unit in Quebec. As a result, it decided to keep her in prison. Michael Bryant, Ontario's Attorney General, fought to get Homolka on the agenda at a meeting of Canada's Justice Ministers. He wanted the federal government to expand the category of dangerous offenders to catch those slipping between the cracks. On the 2nd of June 2005, the Ontario Crown will ask a Quebec judge to impose conditions under Section 810 of Criminal Code on Homolka's release. The French and Mahaffey families wanted even tighter restrictions on Homolka, including asking that she submit to electronic monitoring or yearly psychological and psychiatric assessments. These conditions are not allowed under Section 810 because they cross the line between preventative justice versus punitive measures. A 2-day hearing was held before Judge Jean R. Bewley in June 2005. He ruled that Homolka, upon her release on the 4th of July 2005, would still pose a risk to the public at large. As a result, using Section 810.2 of the Criminal Code, certain restrictions were placed on Homolka as a condition of her release. She was to tell police her home address, work address, and with whom she lives. She was required to notify police as soon as any of the above changed. She was likewise required to notify police of any change to her name. If she planned to be away from her home for more than 48 hours, she had to give 72 hours notice. She could not contact Paul Bernardo, the families of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, or that of the woman known as Jane Doe, or any violent criminals. She was forbidden to be with people under the age of 16 and to consume drugs other than prescription medicine. She was required to continue therapy and counselling, and she was also required to provide police with a DNA sample. There was a penalty of a maximum 2-year prison term for violating such an order. While this reassured the public that Homolka would find it difficult to offend again, it was felt by the court that it might be detrimental to her as well, because public hostility and her high profile might endanger her upon release. On the 10th of June 2005, Senator Michael Biron declared that the conditions placed on Homolka were totalitarian, according to an interview with CTV Newsnet. 2 weeks later, Biron apologised. Homolka then filed a request in the Quebec Superior Court for a wide-ranging injunction aimed at preventing the press from reporting about her following her release. On the 4th of July 2005, Homolka was released from Saint-Anne-des-Plaines prison. She granted her first interview to Radio-Canada television, speaking entirely in French. Homolka told interviewer Joyce Napier that she chose Radio-Canada because she had found it to be less sensational than the English language media. She said that she had likewise found Quebec to be more accepting of her than Ontario. She affirmed that she would be living within the province, but refused to say where. She said that she had paid her debt to society legally, but not emotionally or socially. She refused to speak about her alleged relationship with Jean-Paul Gerbert, a convicted murderer serving a life sentence. During the interview, her solicitor, Sylvie Bordelais, sat beside Homolka. However, she did not speak. Homolka's mother was also present but off-screen, and was acknowledged by Homolka. The national media reported in July 2005 that Homolka had relocated to the island of Montreal. On the 21st of August 2005, it was reported that she had been sighted in the South Shore community of Longueuil across the St. Lawrence River from Montreal. On the 30th of November 2005, Quebec Superior Court Judge James Brunton lifted all restrictions imposed on Homolka, saying there was not enough evidence to justify them. On the 6th of December, the Quebec Court of Appeal upheld Brunton's decision. The Quebec Justice Department decided not to take the case to the Supreme Court, despite Ontario's urging. TVA reported on the 8th of June 2006 that Homolka's request to have her name changed was rejected. She had attempted to change her name legally to Emily Chiara Tremblay, Tremblay being one of the most common surnames in Quebec. Sun Media reported in 2007 that Homolka had given birth to a baby boy. Quebec Children's Aid said that despite Homolka's past, the new mother would not automatically be scrutinised. Several nurses had refused to care for Homolka before she gave birth. On the 14th of December 2007, City News reported that Homolka had left Canada for the Antilles so that her now 1-year-old could lead a more normal life. On the 21st of February 2006, the Toronto Star reported that Bernardo had admitted having sexually assaulted at least 10 other women in attacks not previously blamed on him. The majority of those assaults took place in 1986, a year before what police termed the Reign of Terror by the Scarborough rapist. Authorities suspected that Bernardo was the culprit in other crimes, such as a string of rapes in Amherst, New York, and the drowning death of Terry Anderson in St. Catharines. He had never acknowledged his involvement. In 2006, Bernardo gave a prison interview in which he claimed that he had reformed and would make a good parole candidate. He became eligible to petition a jury for early parole in 2008 under the faint hope clause, since he committed multiple murders before the 1997 Criminal Code Amendment, but did not do so. In 2015, Bernardo applied for a day parole in Toronto. According to the victim's lawyer, Tim Danson, it is unlikely that Bernardo will ever be released in any capacity due to his dangerous offender status. In September 2013, Bernardo was transferred to Millhaven Institution in Bath, where he was reportedly segregated from other inmates. In November 2015, Bernardo self-published a book titled A Mad World Order, a violent, fictional 631-page ebook on Amazon. By the 15th of November, the book was reportedly an Amazon bestseller, but was removed from the website due to a public outcry. In October 2018, Bernardo had been set to go to trial for possession of a shank weapon while incarcerated. However, the prosecution dropped the charges due to their determination that there was no reasonable probability of a conviction. Bernardo became eligible for parole in February 2018. On the 17th of October that year, he was denied day and full parole by the Parole Board of Canada. His next parole hearing took place on the 22nd of June 2021. It took only 1 hour of deliberation by the presiding judge for his application to be turned down. In May 2023, after spending a decade at Millhaven Institution, Bernardo was transferred to La Macabre Institution, a medium security facility in Quebec, where he would continue to serve his indeterminate sentence. The transfer caused controversy, and the reason for the transfer was not provided to the public. The Federal Prison Service reviewed the decision and found it to be sound. Bernardo had successfully applied to be moved there. Bernardo's next parole hearing was scheduled for February 2024. This was also denied. Bernardo scored 35 out of 40 on the psychopathy checklist, a psychological assessment tool used to assess the presence of psychopathy in individuals. This is classed as clinical psychopathy, making Bernardo a clinical psychopath. Homolka, by contrast, scored 5 out of 40. At his 17th of October 2018 parole hearing, evidence from expert psychiatric reports found that he had deviant sexual interests and he met the diagnostic criteria of sexual sadism, voyeurism, and paraphilia not otherwise specified. The reports furthermore stated that he met the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder and met the requirement for a diagnosis of psychopathy, meaning he was thereby more likely to repeat violent sexual offending. The reports concluded that Bernardo showed minimal insight into his offending, which is consistent with file information that suggests he has been keen over the years to come up with his own unsubstantiated reasons for his criminal behaviour. On the 21st of June 2012, Canadian journalist Paula Todd published a 40-page ebook titled Finding Karla: How I Tracked Down an Elusive Serial Child Killer and Discovered a Mother of 3, which revealed that Homolka had relocated to Guadeloupe and changed her name to Leanne Bordelaise. She is married to her lawyer's brother, Thierry Bordelaise, with whom she has 2 sons and 1 daughter. Todd wrote that she visited the Bordelaise residence and stayed for about 1 hour. Todd reported that she spent stretches of time simply watching the 3 Bordelaise children play and concluded that Homolka appeared to be an excellent mother. After the visit, Homolka phoned her lawyer and ceased contact with Todd, stating that no one cares about where she is or what she's doing. A poll of 9,521 people concluded that 63.27% believed that the public had the right to know Homolka's location. 18.57% of voters believed that she deserved anonymity, and 18.16% believed that Homolka should be permitted to receive anonymity in about 50 years. Thank you for listening to this episode of Shadow Crimes. If you liked this episode, be sure to follow us on social media and check out our website at shadowcrimes.com. You can also listen to this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as all other podcast platforms. Be sure to check out our other episodes and stay tuned for new episodes released every Wednesday here on Shadow Crimes, where mysteries thrive and shadows speak.